Guys, it's finally here. I am so pumped. The all-in-one fishing app, this smart fishing spot system, literally has everything you could ever want as a fisherman, from tides to wind to weather to radar to sonar to underwater views. All of this combined would cost hundreds of dollars if you went and got every individual app. Yet this is all-in-one. Best news, it's completely free to our insider members. This is going to take your pre-trip planning and really just your knowledge of picking the best spots based on the wind and the weather. It does all this stuff for you. It literally tells you the best day and the best time and the best tide to fish in your area based on your tide stations and all the different variables that we're bringing in every 15 minutes on this app. So get it while you can. It is in beta test mode for our insider members. And once again, it is completely free. So if you're not a member yet, what the heck are you waiting on? Someone to grab you by the hand and show you exactly where to fish? Because that is what we're doing. Once again, all completely free, this smart fishing spot system, when you join the Insider Club today. Hope to see you inside soon.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again. Got my partner here and broski, Luke Simons, like diamonds. What's up, dude?
Not much. Let's do this. This is going to be a helpful one. This is something that I think we've all stumbled on over the years, and time to highlight some mistakes.
Bad habits is really what we're calling them. So 5 bad habits that destroy your chances of consistently catching fish. This was a question asked to us, and meaning, hey, there's bad habits that fishermen have, and we're like, yeah, because we all have had them or have them still. And there's 5 really big ones that stood out that I think, to your point, Luke, everyone goes through them at some point or another. If you can fix all 5 of these, you will become a really consistent angler. You will catch more fish per trip. Your confidence will go up. You will just be an overall like much better angler, and probably, to the point you could coach other people and help other people out. So let's start with number 1. Let's just get right into it. Once again, these are 5 bad habits that most fishermen have or have gone through at one point or another. So number 1, what do we got, Luke?
Yeah, let's talk about depth control.
Yes.
This is the depth of either lures or live bait. Both of them are very important, and this is an issue that a lot of us have. It's holding a lot of people back, and it's just about always considering the running depth of your lure, or if you're using a live bait, the natural depth that it's going to go, and then so that way you can add more weight or more flotation based on the specific area you're fishing and the species that you're targeting. A lot of people don't get this right, and that is a huge issue, because you can be in the really good spot with hungry fish, and if you don't have your lure or bait at the right depth, you might as well not be in a good spot.
Right. And I think the bass fishing arena has done a good job with this. I maybe you can envision this. I've seen it out there before, where it's an image, it's an animated image, and it's basically a bank, right? And you got basically a shelf that goes down, and at the bottom, right, is like 2 largemouth bass, right? And you got the fisherman up there, and it's basically showing the different levels of this water column. And unless he's in that bottom area, that bass is not going to come up and hit it by his feet. Or even if it's 10 feet deep, if you're fishing at 7 with a bobber, there's times where they're so hungry they'll come up. But in most cases, you want to get that worm or whatever you're using, your crawdad, you want to get it right in front of that bass's face. And it's the same with saltwater fishing. One of the very first podcasts we did, the very first live on the water one, remember that you guys got to witness me, if you watched that one, learning this the hard way. And Luke had a heavier jig head. He was getting down closer to the bottom where these feeding fish were. I was way up here, and I literally got 0 strikes. I mean, this is all on film live. Luke kept catching all the fish, and until I finally used a larger jig head to get lower depth control, all of a sudden I started catching fish. There are so many times, I promise you, that you've been in an area with tons of fish and you caught nothing because your lure or your live bait was not anywhere close to the actual feeding fish.
Yeah, and so I'll say one lure in particular, because I see it all the time, and it's popping corks, right? Where you use a popping cork and have a lure underneath. Those aren't really popular at all for freshwater fishing. And I think it's a big reason why is because a lot of bass anglers are fishing steeper banks. Whereas in saltwater, we have a lot of flats and the bottom is pretty level. So if you can actually get it set up properly where the popping cork and your lure underneath it is at a good depth, it'll apply to the whole retrieve, whereas bass fishing is not so much. But what a lot of people get wrong is that if you're fishing, say, a flat with a channel that goes down or that has a pothole that's a little bit deeper, now that popping cork, yes, it's an advantage of attracting attention to the lure, but if those fish aren't really active, right? If the fish are active, they'll kind of hit anything. It's really about matching your presentation to those days when the fish aren't going to be active and you really have to get near them. As Joe said, and sometimes if you don't get right in their face, they're not going to eat it. And so using a popping cork, it prohibits you from getting your lure down to those fish that are holding to the bottom of the potholes, which is often the case, particularly in the wintertime. So that's just one example of many that I've seen. I guess probably the example I see most frequently, but the same thing applies with light bait. Similar thing, right? Floating some shrimp, again, over a grass flat and like a live shrimp. And same thing, if it's on the shallow flats, it's great. But then as soon as it gets deeper, now that shrimp is going to be a couple feet off the bottom. And if those fish aren't active, they're not going to swim those extra couple feet. Whereas if you had it free lined or if you had a little split shot on it to let it get down there at the bottom, right in the fish's face, that'll make all the difference in the world.
Yep. And same with docks. We've seen people fish docks. We love dock fishing. In most cases, not 100%, but in most of them, and especially in the middle of the day, those fish are at the bottom. And unless, like, if you're using like a power prawn, that's like our favorite lure for fishing docks, your jig head better be heavy enough you want to feel it popping off the bottom. You want to feel it hitting the bottom. That is when you catch the fish. If you had someone just skipping something underneath like a paddle tail and whipping it back, they're going to catch nothing. The fish will just be down there. They might gaze up and laugh at it, but in most cases, they probably don't even see it up there. I mean, you have to have your bait on the bottom. That's why depth control is so critical. That's why on that power prawn, why we're not a big fan of some of these super fancy, realistic looking, shrimp lures, because they're pre-rigged. You can only use them in one depth. So the depth control goes out the door. You're now basically in the bad habit number one is not thinking about where these fish are going to be holding, what depth. So nothing worse than actually finding a good spot, right? That's one of the hardest things to do, and it's the most important. And then getting there, not having your lure, your live bait in the right presentation. I mean, Peter Deeks in that live bait course, he spent a whole module talking about using the right weight to make sure your bait is in that right depth. Depth control is absolutely critical.
Yeah, critical for live bait and lures. And you mentioned I think nothing worse than like fishing some docks and not catching anything, and then someone comes behind you and starts crushing them. And that's happened before. And a big thing too. Again, I've learned this the hard way. I never used to use jig heads more than a quarter ounce. Like I would just never use them. And not coincidentally, but I never thought about it. I never really did good at docks that were more than like 8 feet deep. And now I'm starting to use a lot of half-ounce jig heads, and now I'm catching way bigger fish much more consistently because now I'm getting down to the bottom of those deeper docks. And guess where a lot of the bigger fish are holding? Next to the deeper stuff, the deeper structure. So again, we all go through it and just thought this would be the first kind of bad habit to highlight, because I'm sure a lot of other people are in that rut as well.
Yeah, and just not even conscious of it in many cases. So the good news is, if you need help on that, we have a whole cheat sheet, a whole PDF on that in our Insider Club. We have all kinds of videos on that as well, on exactly what lure or live bait to use based on where you're at, what depth, etc. Pretty cool. So it's all there at the Salt Strong Insider Club. So number 2, let's move on to number 2. I talked about spots being so important. Number 2 is around that, and it's around the 90-10. And if you don't know what that means, it's that 90% of all feeding fish can be found in about 10% of any area at any given time. We just took the drone up this week. Wait till you see, we got some sick footage of big schools of redfish, big schools of snook, and even that one snook and that big school reds. Wait till you see this stuff. It is epic. Got a brand new drone. It is so clear. And in every case, the 90-10 applies. In every single case, you can literally look down, and if everything you see is 100%, all the fish are in about 10% of any area. They're all holding in one place for a specific reason. And yet the majority of people find themselves in that 90% zone where there's no fish, right? Or maybe 10% of the fish if you're lucky. I'd rather have the flip flop. I'd rather be in the 10% zone where 90% of the feeding fish are, right? You want to be in the smaller area where all of the fish are concentrated, not in the massive area where there might be some leftovers, hoping and praying that you're going to have one of those come across your boat or kayak or wading boots. So Luke, talk a little bit more about that 90-10. Obviously, we solve for that in the Insider Club. That is really our main focus every week, is putting our members in that 90-10 zone. But for those of you that aren't a member, maybe still confused, any tips you can share on how to do that? I know we've talked about in a prior podcast about eliminating areas just right off the bat that we know are not going to be good, just to make it a little bit less intimidating. Anything else you can share there?
Yeah, I mean, we know most of the fish are ambush predators. And so like snook, redfish, sea trout, flounder especially, they usually hold near some sort of structure. So if there's an area that like a vast area that is just flat sand with no structure on the bottom, no bridge pilings, no dock pilings, no nothing, then you can pretty much write that off. That's more than likely to be a dead zone. The odds of a lot of fish congregating on just a random flat sand zone is very small. You'll probably catch some catfish there if you're lucky. And conversely, right, you can use online maps, and we have a lot of lessons on doing this. You can get free maps online, put it in the satellite imagery view, and you can actually have satellite look, bird's eye view of the bottom structure where you can see under the water in many cases. You can look for seagrass patches, you can look for rocks, you can look for oysters, obviously dock pilings. You can see regardless of water clarity of whichever area you're fishing, and you can see trees. Long story short, look for structure. Look for something that these predator fish can hold next to ambush prey. And then when you find that structure, that's going to increase the odds of there being fish. Obviously, fish move. So seasonally, fish move around. Even the bait moves. A lot of times, fish are following the bait. So it's more than just finding some structure on a map. But that's a big step that a lot of people don't take. Some people just go out and anchor out like in the middle of the bay and just sit there and hope for the best. And that rarely works. In most cases, you need to actually hunt the fish down. You need to move yourself into a good zone. And we call it the 90-10 zone. Move yourself into that zone. And when you do that, everything else is a lot easier. If you get into a great area with a bunch of fish, you don't have to have the perfect lure. You don't have to have the perfect live bait, and you're still going to catch fish. Contrarily, if you're in the air without anything, it doesn't matter what lure you have, or you can have the most expensive bait and everything you can imagine, and you're just not going to catch fish. So very, very big mistake. And also just thinking about the current flow, like how the current is hitting the structure. You want to be on an area where there's actually current flow that's coming up against the structure that's going to be bringing food to the spots that the predator fish are most likely going to be holding in. So the upcurrent side is often going to be better than some area that is like in the back of a cove that doesn't have much water flow. So just kind of thinking about those things and just putting the odds more in your favor.
Yep. And you'll know if you're in the 90-10 zone, like you'll know quickly. You'll get strikes like within hopefully 10, sometimes within 2 minutes, but hopefully within 10 minutes where you start moving. I've seen some of those guys. I feel horrible for them. They call them the shrimp soakers. And there's nothing wrong with using shrimp, but they'll sit there. Like you said, they'll put an anchor down and sit in a channel, whatever. They'll sit there for 2 hours just soaking shrimp, hoping to get a straggler going by. If you're in the 90-10 zone, like we've had times, Luke, like when you're in the zone, you can't get the shrimp down to the bottom before it's getting hit by something. Even if it's getting taken off by a small snapper or something, you'll know when you're in a 90-10 zone. I mean, you're getting like ferocious strikes. Not every single cast, but you'll know when you're in that 90-10 zone. If you need help, once again, that's something we do in our Insider Club. Just if you do nothing else but watch Luke's video on Friday, that's where he curates everything happening out there and does it in 10 minutes or less. So basically takes 40 hours of intel and does it in 10 minutes every single Friday morning and shows you the exact types of spots based on trends, based on real-time data, right? Based on weather and tides and what other people are doing and where they're catching fish, and says, here's the exact types of spots and depth that you want to be fishing this coming weekend. We do that every single week. That's just one of the many things we do in our Insider Club. So if you are a current member, definitely watch those. I hear from members all the time saying, wow, that is like the most valuable thing. I'd pay thousands of dollars just like having a fishing guide in your back pocket. And if you're not a member, definitely join up today at saltstrong.com. So speaking of the shrimp soakers, number 3 is being held hostage to live bait. We've had a lot of pros, like, guys like C. Richardson and Mike Anderson, Peter Deeks, and each one of those guys might instantly bring up a thought of, oh, well, Peter Deeks is the live bait guy. C. Richardson's a hard bait or soft plastic guy. Mike Anderson kind of does both. All 3 of those guys on the podcast said the one thing holding back people from catching as many fish as they want is not knowing how to do both. So this is not poo-pooing on live bait, but if you can't go out there quickly, because there are days in times of year where live bait is really tough to get, if you can't get live bait quickly, or you just have an hour to fish, you are held hostage to live bait. It is going to absolutely destroy your chances of consistently catching fish. We have friends that do that. They literally have never caught a fish in a lure, don't want to learn, and they're always like, man, how do you guys catch so many fish? It's like, well, we learn how to use lures. And they're like, oh man, I wish I could do that. Well, you can. It's not that hard. So Luke, talk about that from your perspective, because you were a bass guy. We talked about that on a prior podcast, and then we came into saltwater, and we had read and heard that you had to have live bait, but that wasn't true at all.
Yeah, I basically put all my bass gear away, and I just brought out. They started getting cast nets, and just really focused on live bait with saltwater fishing, and that's my biggest regret overall. That held me back multiple years.
What about the really short hair? I thought that was a regret.
Yeah, that's a regret too. But yeah. So because using live bait, first of all, it slows you down, right? You have to first go out and catch it, and many times that's going to be early in the morning, especially summertime. That's like the early morning twilight bite. That's like the primo bite. So that's usually when the most feeding is happening. You're out there spending that time catching bait. At least I was, and then when you get the bait, you can't really move as fast. So if you don't know exactly where the fish are, if you don't know that 90-10 zone, you're less likely to find it than if you just go out with lures from the get-go, and you can actually now start covering more water, and you have more. My reasoning and my regret is that I really wasn't getting better when I was using live bait, because I would just go to the same kind of areas. I wasn't really trying a bunch of spots every trip, and I didn't see many examples. And then as soon as I moved, and I no longer had a live well where I literally could not use live bait, and I bought my first little skiff. Then I just had my trolling motor, and I went back to my favorite bass lure, little basket or little jerk bait, and now I was moving and covering water, and I started actually seeing where the fish were holding and also where they weren't holding based on different conditions. And I eventually started figuring out, I was able to predict where they would be. So through lures, long story short, I was able to figure out where the 90-10 zone was quicker than I ever was when I was using live bait. So it basically just speeds up the learning process and helps you put that puzzle together. Every day is a different puzzle. Conditions are always a little bit different. And the more times you've gone through the repetition, the quicker you are at putting that puzzle together. And so using lures will force you to do that. It'll enable you to do that. And I think, to me, that's the number one hindrance of the live bait focus is just the inability to actually cover water and just see more things when you're out there. Of course, you see cooler things, but just to see where the fish are and to see examples of it all being put together.
The word that comes to mind is freedom. The when you can understand how to use live bait and lures, you now have freedom. And what I mean by that is you're now free from not having to have a live well or a bubbler or, lunking around some, big heavy thing of live shrimp, a bucket or whatever it might be. You now don't have to haul around a cast net and have to worry about, oh man, where we're going to find bait. Where's the bait? Anyone know where the bait is? Or, hey, in the wintertime when there's not much bait at all, and you're sitting there like, I'm just going to sit in the house, I guess, when all my lure guys or my buddies are just out there slaying it. Wintertime, by the way, is fantastic time to be using lures and catching a ton of fish. So it just gives you more freedom. And you can do it on your lunch break, right? I mean, you can go right before work, early in the morning, use some top water. We have some people on our team, like Jake. I mean, he doesn't even have a boat or kayak, and he just loves wade fishing and catches decent, nice fish. Just going out right before work and using some lures, some slam shady and power prawn and a moonwalker right there from shore, and then gets back in the truck and goes home. So so much more freedom.
Yeah, when we were in high school, we were able to afford those days where you can spend the day out on the water all day and eventually put the pieces together over like an 8-hour span. But once you get the working world, that's when it really started. That's when my fishing really struggled. And that's when I finally started using lures. And then I will go before work or after work just for like a 2-hour span. And then once I got better at putting that puzzle together, I was catching some really good fish in that short time with lures. And then I eventually got to the point where now it's kind of painful for me to actually use live bait now when going after red, snook, and trout, because just knowing that the lures work, as long as you can just put it in front of the fish's face, they're going to hit it. And so that was like the biggest mistake that I had. It was to focus on live bait. I was doing it exclusively, and every once in a while I throw lures, but that was just that held me back multiple years from getting to where I wanted to be.
It's a bad habit. Speaking of bad habits, bad habit number 4. This is one I think that the most people fall into, even the pros, even us. We've all done this. Sometimes, and it's usually we'll have that bad day. And we're like, man, we should have taken our own advice. And you might be able to guess what this one is. It's probably what a lot of people thought we're going to start talking about first. It's going back to the same old spots that you caught a fish before, right? And we've all done it. Like even when we're going out sometimes, like, I remember that time when I caught that big red right there, and you're tempted like, oh, let's slow down and fish it. And in the beginning, when we first started, remember we had old Dennis, and he showed us some of his spots and gave us freedom, because he was a great angler. He had more spots than he knew what to do with. He'd been fishing Charlotte Harbor and that whole area forever in Bokeelia. And he gave us a handful of spots, and we went back to we used and abused those things for the longest time. And we're so inconsistent. Some days that spot would be on fire, and then like the next 3 trips would be nothing. Like, what happened? Like, oh, I didn't realize that fish have tails and no fences. They're moving every day, moving every tide cycle. And we didn't really get that. And so we kept going back to the same old spots over and over again. That's just a recipe for inconsistency. And there's something really fun. Like it's the adventure of going out and finding new spots, right? And all of a sudden you find something you didn't know about or never even thought about, or maybe passed by 15 times. And you're like, wow, this thing is just absolutely loaded. So, any feedback on that one, Luke, on that habit of continually going to the same spot over and over and over again?
Yeah, I really remember how excited I was, and we all were, when it was Dennis Offs, he took us to the spot and we caught our first slam. Like in one spot, we caught a redfish, a snook, or multiple fish actually, but redfish, snook, trout, we caught them all in one spot. And we'd never done that before. And so we were like high five, and it really wasn't that far from where we would stay when we go down there. So it was like best day ever, right? Oh my gosh, we have a slam spot. Like our problems are over. Like now we're going to be catching slams every trip.
Yeah.
And then we go back there, and we rarely ever caught a slam ever since then. Like it was just that particular day, the conditions were right and we had the right bait, and Dennis knew it. Like Dennis was smart enough to know that it was really situational. That spot was really good based on the conditions and the time of the year. Whereas we were like so pumped that we went to that spot literally every single trip for the next 2 or 3 years, probably. Like no lie, like literally go back there every time. And sometimes we do okay. Sometimes we get totally skunked. And it was just frustrating because we didn't really know why. And it was just because we weren't putting in the other factors. We would try to match the right tide to what it was that day, or the right season, or the right wind direction, but like we'd really never like put it all together. And so that was, again, a big issue, putting too much faith in the spot itself. Now we're doing insider reports every week. Me and other coaches go out to new areas. And it's some of my best days are actually going to areas that I've never been to before. And you just, all you can rely on are just knowing what the factors have been, knowing what the recent trends have been. Obviously, you know what the weather and the tide is going to be doing, and then just putting it together and applying what you've seen in one area, like recently or heard about recently, to foreign waters, and you can crush them. And some of my worst days are when I'm fishing waters that I fished for many years. And it's like, it's just human nature to go back and, okay, I've caught my personal best redfish on this point. You go back to that point like every time, even when the conditions aren't favorable, you still like have to go there. And it's really hard to get past that mindset. And so you really have to purposefully go against that mindset. And so we just wanted to make sure to highlight that, because that's something that we all go through, and we all will go through, because that's just flat out human nature.
Absolutely. And once again, if you need help finding the right spot and finding new spots, because we're going and fishing new spots every day, and we show them to our members, just because we know that, hey, one of the most exciting parts is sharing and helping, and then finding new spots on your own. And so we do that in our Insider Club. literally Monday through Friday, new spot that we fish, and we reveal everything, even some of the bad trips, because that does happen where we're like, oh man, this actually ended up being the 90-10 zone, and I didn't find it to the very end of the trip where I finally caught fish. So super, super helpful to watch those. So now let's go on to number 5. So I'll start it off, Luke, with a question. So my son, Jackson, is 5 going on 6, and he's starting to get into baseball. And so the question is, if he wants to get good at baseball, which he does, and he wants to improve, and I want to see him become a better baseball player, I got 2 options. Number 1, I say, Jackson, here is a baseball, here's a glove, and here's a bat. And here's a field. Go out and figure it out on your own, son. It might take you 20 years, but at some point, you'll probably figure out this game of baseball, and you might end up being decent. That's option number 1. Put him out there on the field, once again, with a ball, a glove, a bat, and say, trial and error, go have fun. At some point, you might get good if you practice enough.
You take him every day.
Oh, yeah, take him every day. Or number 2, we hire a coach and get him on a baseball team where he's got other peers and he's learning from other people, and he's getting to learn how to throw and watch other people who might be better than him saying, oh man, I see how he does that. And they have a coach to work on the mechanics, right? And you guys all know the answer and probably know where I'm going with this. Anything we want to get good at in life, or anything we want our kids to get good at, we hire a coach, right? Whether it's dancing to bowling to taekwondo, anything, tennis, like you hire a coach, you get in a group, you be around other people, you join a team or you join a club. And yet fishing is one of the things I still don't understand why. I don't know if it's because it's predominantly men and we're all afraid to ask for help and directions, but it's like one of those only sports where people like almost have, I don't know if it's pride or just stubbornness, like, oh yeah, I just want to figure it out on my own. I'd rather take 20 years to get a bunch of shortcuts. And people say that. I think like we see that on some of our Facebook ads, and people like, oh man, those guys are cheating. They're giving away spots and showing too much, and it's making it too easy. Like, what part of that sounds bad? It sounds pretty awesome. That's what we all want, shortcuts. I mean, you only have so much time on this earth, and as we get older and have families and jobs, our time is valuable. Why wouldn't you want to maximize it? It baffles me that some people really want to do this the hard way through trial and error versus getting help and shortcuts and having a network, right? Look, I'd love for you to share that story. I know some have heard it, but it's worth repeating because you guys ended up beating all these full-time guides as dudes who had full-time jobs in this tournament series because you formed your own little network. And that was a super small, and we now have a 30,000 person network. But tell that story real quick.
Yeah. So once I, again, finally started using lures, started getting super addicted to fishing stalls going all the time. It started getting good enough to where I was like, me and buddy Nick, like, let's join a tournament series. And so we get in this thing. At that point, we were like, this is over in the Indian River where the trout are just huge. At that point, we would catch like a 25-inch trout, maybe once a quarter or so. And that's a big trout. But to place in these tournaments, like a 25 probably won't do it. You need like a 27 or bigger. And so we started doing these tournaments. And the very first one, we got lucky. We got a 28. It was a really big one. And but then over time, we realized that we're going up against guys. They're full-time guys going to these tournaments. There's a decent amount of money involved. So there was some legit anglers. And the guys were winning almost every time. And so there was a group of us. There's 4 different teams of 2. So literally just a network of 8 people. And all we did is we would just help each other out, where we would talk about our pre-trip fishing, like where we were going, where we were seeing the bait, what lures the fish were striking on, what depths
the depth,
were they holding. Yeah. And then like current flow, talk about the tide and the time of day and how the fish were moving around. And just simply by doing that, right, went from rarely catching 25-inch trout to now catching like literally multiple 20-inch, 5-inch trout or bigger every trip for like a year. Like it was by far the biggest growth I'd ever had in my fishing. And it was simply just having a network of like-minded anglers who enjoy fishing and who weren't hiding stuff back, like weren't holding it. Oh no, where'd you catch it? Oh, I caught it in the mouth, right? Or I caught it in the water. Like, no, like, hey, I caught it at this type. You don't have to give your exact spot. We do, but you don't. But you can just stay in this type of area with this lure or this depth and these conditions. And that information is invaluable. Another mistake I made is I used to log my trips. I mentioned that I was very addicted and I'm analytical. So I would print out a tide chart on every trip. and I would mark on that chart where I caught fish and what species they were, so I could see on the tide cycle where it was, and I would sort them by month. So I had these little manila folders. And then so if I was going out in March, right, I would pull my March folder out and look at the past years on where I was going. And it was really not that helpful. It wasn't nearly as helpful as just getting some real time information, like what happened the past 3 to 7 days, or really 0 to 7 days. Like what happened in the last 7 days is way more valuable than what happened in the past 7 years. So it's all about recent information from like-minded humans is the network that we're talking about. By far the biggest growth I've ever had, and like by far my biggest regret that I didn't start doing that until probably 15 years of actually like being very addicted to fishing.
Yeah. And that's why it's such an important part of the Insider Club. It's one that we don't talk about a lot, on the front end as we're trying to, let's just be honest, sell people to come in. And it's because I don't think a lot of people get it until they get in and they see it like, oh, like people are really sharing and super, super helpful. And we have had countless testimonials of people saying, I just had my best day, not just because of Luke or one of our coaches, but because of someone else in the area. Now people are teaming up and fishing together, right? I mean, Joe and Brian there in Port Charlotte have been slaying it together. They're both doing good, but together. And to your point, they're now just talking and sharing, hey, I'm here in Placida, you're over here and near Bokeelia. Let's kind of meet in the middle and fish some of these spots and share some intel. And they've been absolutely crushing it. Yep. And I love seeing that. I love this whole network effect. And the community, it's online and it's private, insiders only, now 30,000 members, and not all 30,000 are in there, of course. You're always in any type of club. You're going to have some that are super active like us. I mean, we're in there, an hour or more every single day, and some that, just check in every once in a while. But people, I mean, it's every 5 minutes at least. There's a new fishing report, like detailed fishing report that shows the depth in the lure or the live bait and any kind of tactics and tips. It is incredibly helpful, and of course, some pictures and some videos sometimes. And I gain from it. Luke gains from it. Our coaches gain from it. I mean, you've caught some great fish because you've heard, hey, these fish are running right now. Like, hey, Wyatt's had one. Hey, these Spanish mackerel are running in North Carolina right now along this beach. And then a couple of members see that, like, cool, I'm going out right now. Thank you guys so much for that tip. It, once again, like having a fishing guide in your back pocket, let you know what's going on. And if you have a problem or a question or you're struggling, you can also ask that and people chime in. There's no negativity. It's completely the opposite of, Facebook, where people are spamming and cursing and hating on each other. We don't allow any of that stuff. There's literally no cursing. There's no negativity, no belittling, or you're gone. We just kick you out and give your money back. And the best news is it's risk-free for a whole year. And here's what I mean by that. We were raised by parents that, taught us that we don't deserve to keep your money unless we added value to your life. And so we said, well, gosh, how would we want a company to treat us? I would love to have a 1-year guarantee on everything I buy, right? How cool would that be if everything you bought had a 1-year like trial? Use it however the heck you want to. And if you're not 100% happy, you ask for your money back. And we do. And we've had a few people take us up on it. I mean, I remember this one person, it was like day 340 or something, almost a full year. And they asked for the money back and basically said, yeah, I haven't caught any more fish. And so we have obviously, a pretty sophisticated back-end system that sees what emails you click on, sees, where, if you went through the courses, sees if you're looking at any of the stuff. They hadn't looked at anything the whole time. But still, it was their fault. But then again, we have a money back guarantee. And so we gave them 100% of the money back, no questions asked. And our job is we wake up every morning saying, how do we add so much value to our members that they would feel crazy to ever not want to keep renewing year after year? And we've done a really good job with that. I mean, we have many, people who've now been there, I think going on 6 years since we started. I mean, just keep renewing and keep referring people just because they absolutely love it. And it's turned into a family too. So not only do you save time by helping you get in the right spot at the right time, you also save money. We now have, with 30,000 members, some pretty sick discounts on everything you can imagine. And then the third piece is that community, this network effect, which is so powerful, and it just keeps growing every day. And we pinch ourselves that we get to do this and hang out with awesome people, like awesome clients that we love. So if you're not one, join us today. What the heck are you waiting on? Someone to grab you by the hand and show you where to fish every week and put dollar bills back in your pants? That's what we're going to do. And I'm talking about, from saving money on tackle, not anything bad.
Yeah, that could be taken the wrong way. But yeah, the network too. I just want to emphasize the network. That was by far the biggest growth that I've had, and that's by far the biggest growth that we see now on a continuous basis in the community. So that again, that group of us 4 teams, just from kind of chatting with each other and being truthful and showing and explaining where we were doing and what was working and also what wasn't working. We went from just getting crushed by the full-time guys that were in those to actually competing with them and beating them in many cases, where like most of us were profitable that year and really the 2 years that we did it before they stopped that whole thing and some of us moved off. But it was so powerful that took me from really struggling to like being decent and rarely ever catching like trophy fish to now placing in tournaments and going there and playing doing a whole tournament series and actually having the winnings more than cover the entry fee. We're literally profited, and then we're just using artificial lures as well. Like we were going against even full-time guys using live bait, and so it really was mind blowing how much of a difference that part made. So whether you do join our club to get that, which is I think the best network out there for this, just at least find your own. It is just incredibly valuable. So that's the one thing that kind of trumps everything else. Because once you do that, everything else comes into play. Where you talk about depth, with those people, and you talk about the lures and where the fish are holding them. So as long as you do that network thing, everything else comes together. And as Joe mentioned, we have that community platform that's there 24/7, and there's anglers helping anglers in there all the day, every day, all day, and we're here to help. So in case you join.
Yep. Well, we call it the Fishing College. If you're watching, you see my shirt. It says Fishing College on it. So yeah, come join us. That's at saltstrong.com. For you current members, thank you so much. A lot of new stuff. You've hopefully already seen the smart fishing spot system. That's this all-in-one app that gives you everything: radar, sonar, satellite maps, and that 3D, that underwater topography view. Like, so sick. I mean, I'm loving just checking out some places that I've been interested in fishing. It's so cool. And obviously radar, might even hear the thunder going on ahead of me. Get on the app and see how big the storm is. So definitely join us at saltstrong.com. Appreciate you guys big time. Luke, this is a good one. Hopefully this helped. Hopefully it's helped you identify a habit or 2 or 5 that you might be kind of in a rut, and just fix one at a time. And you will see your fishing game completely transformed. You'll start catching more fish, and you have more fun too, right? No one likes bad habits, and yet they're all easy to fall into because we've all done them. We've all been there. And that number 4, that going back to the same spot, even some of the best do that. Like that one's the toughest one, I'd say. But just be conscious of it. Like Luke said, you got to sometimes just do the opposite and fight it and say, you know what, I'm not going to go to that spot. I'm not going to go to that spot. It's a dead zone. So this was fun.
Good stuff. Hope you enjoy. And any questions at all, comment section down below. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep. Comment down below. See you guys in the next episode. Peace. We out. Whoop, whoop. 'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.